Conditions in the manufacturing sector remain depressed, although there was some improvement in November. The Purchasing Managers Index, gauging the conditions in the manufacturing sector, rose by 2.8 index points in the month, but remains below the neutral 50 index points level at 48.2 index points. A reading below 50 indicates a contraction, while a number above 50 indicates an expansion. This was the first increase following 2 months of decline in the headline index. The business activity and new sales orders indices are both still pointing to declining activity and demand, although at a slower rate than before. ABSA economists say some worrying signs in the survey results include the employment index, which remains weak at 41.1 index points. Another concern is that the congestion at South Africa's ports is resulting in slower delivery of supplies. They note that respondents say the unavailability of materials required could hurt production abilities and push up costs. The expected business conditions index declined further to its weakest level since the strictest months of the COVID-19 lockdown in 2020. Andiswa Mdingi-Nondudule is an economist at ABSA, and she joins me now. Thank you so much for your time on SABC News. So PMI looks at trends in the manufacturing and service sector. Why do we watch it, and what's the importance of that data that you collect?
So the importance of the data is to basically see what we can expect from the official output data that SABC publishes. So we sort of get an outlook, if you will, on how the sector is going to perform and so forth. So that's why we look at the PMI data amongst other data, just as a leading indicator for manufacturing output.
Sure. So what we saw for November was that 48.2 points. Just take me through why we saw that figure, what goes into that.
So I think, as you pointed out in your intro, what goes into that figure is you have the index that measures activity levels, new sales orders. You also have employment there, as well as other indices. So what drove the improvement in November was the new sales orders index, as well as the business activity index. So those rose in November, even though they still remains below the 50 neutral level. They still rose during the month. And also, if you look at the supplier lead times, that index also improved. I think it's worth noting, though, however, that this index is inverted. So an increase in this index is supposed to basically lift the PMI. Before the COVID period, an increase in this index was sort of associated with improving business conditions within the sector. But as we saw in the last couple of years, that supply chain issues can result in this index being high as well. And for this period particularly, I think the issues at South Africa's ports has affected those lengthier supply times.
Andiswa, I think we sometimes try and hold on to any ray or any positivity that comes through in data. So the fact that this was the first increase after 2 months of decline, is there any cause for celebration there?
I guess we can, but then if you look at the outlook, with manufacturers are expecting business conditions in 6 months' time to deteriorate. And I think that's because of the recent intensification that we saw in load shedding, as well as the issues at the ports. So I think they're not very optimistic about future business conditions. But I think any little hope that we can hold on, we can. But I think there's a lot of risks as well that come with that.
Yeah, it is a very low bar. It's still under 50, pointing to, depressed conditions, as you put it in that PMI. But, you've also spoken about the outlook being quite low. What would have to change materially so we could see an expansion in that figure at some point next year?
I think a sustained sort of improvement in load shedding. I know we did see in October especially, there was a lot of improvement in load shedding, but then we seem to have sort of gone back to where we were before that with the recent intensifying load shedding. So I think a sustained improvement in and load shedding would help. But also if we are able to solve the issues at the ports. But then, as we know, officials have said that this is likely to take months to sort of get back to normal levels. So I think an improvement in those two factors specifically could lead to sort of higher outlook levels, or manufacturers could expect conditions to improve if those conditions improve.
Thank you so much for your time on SABC News. Andiswa Mdingi-Nondudule, an economist at ABSA, joining us there just to take us through those PMI figures. Really appreciate it.